fabulous. You know how like we forgot to, or we missed it one time, and now we have to hit the record button. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Really glad to have you all with us for what I'm sure will be a fabulous workshop today with Meredith Tarian from the Fundraising Academy and lots of other good things. She's got a wonderful background of experience as a longtime consultant, a lot of experience with military and veterans causes. In fact, I just saw, Meredith, that you have a big job now with Blue Star Families, which is wonderful organization. They have a big presence here in San Diego, which I'm sure you know, but yeah. So, well, great. We're very happy to have you. Just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, well, first I should introduce myself because I think there might be a few people here who I have not met before, but my name is Sharon Goodson and I work at the Leech Tag Foundation and Impact Cubed. And this workshop series is brought to you by us, Leech Tag Impact Cubed, and our good friends at Dr. Bronner's. And so I know we have a number of Dr. Bronner's grantees with us also today. So welcome to you. We joined forces this year as we realized that both of our teams were doing a lot of work around professional development, workshops, and all that good stuff. And so we're very happy to work together. So thank you there. A couple of housekeeping things. As you saw, I'm recording the workshop and we will send the link to the workshop, recording either later today or tomorrow, as well as the slides. So just in case you need those, they are coming your way. This is a series of workshops. We have, at this point, we kind of set our sights that we were only going to do what, maybe 8 or 10 or something. And now we have a workshop, I think, every other week. So there's really great stuff coming up. We have one in a couple weeks on the 18th on corporate sponsorships with folks from foundations. And we'll make sure that you all know about that as well. And a lot of great things happening throughout the summer and fall. So I think with that, I am going to turn it over to Meredith. And we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, everybody. We are going to talk about a really important topic today, which is donor stewardship and why it's so important and really what it means. I'm sure most of us on the call here are familiar with the word stewardship, and we know from a general sense, what stewardship means. But there's so much more to it, and it's a really important topic because it becomes very costly and inefficient for us in nonprofits to try to find new donors constantly. It's like a never-ending hamster wheel, right? So we want to retain the donors we have. So that being said, let's kind of, if I could get my mouse to work here, let's kind of jump into this and talk about this topic. So like Sharon said, I'm your trainer today. My name is Meredith Tarian. I am a trainer with National University's Fundraising Academy, and I kind of wear a couple of other hats as well. So my whole career for the past 15 years or so has been exclusively in the nonprofit industry and focused even more exclusively just in fundraising. For the past 6 years or so, I've worked as a consultant, which has given me a really unique opportunity to work with dozens of different organizations kind of across the country. So everything from really small shops to really large shops, national organizations, and even higher education. Like Sharon mentioned, I have a kind of a unique background in the sense that I've worked with a lot of military and veterans organizations. So just that mission area is kind of near and dear to my heart. I was a military spouse for 14 years and just kind of recognize the unique challenges and opportunities that military organizations have. And then most recently, I accepted a position as the executive vice president of the chapter network with Blue Star Families. So just to take that a step further, I do that as well. So that being said, hopefully I can share with you today a lot of information and kind of lessons learned over the many years that I've been doing this, and also share with you some data that that'll help to kind of back it up. So for today, let's talk about like what we will be exploring in our webinar today or in our educational session. So the objectives that we'll go over today is, what is the meaning and benefits of donor retention? What does that really mean to us as an organization? We'll talk about reasons that donors stay and why they leave. And we'll talk about ways to prevent that and how to build long-term relationships with our donors. So let's start. I'd like to make this as interactive as we can. So I'll just ask you if you could, feel free to jump in. If you have a question at any point throughout the presentation, feel free to just take yourself off of mute and interrupt me. That would be perfectly fine. You'll see a few of these community share screens. It's really valuable in a session like this where we can get experiences and lessons learned from everybody who's on the call and not just myself. So I'll ask you if you could share with us today to get us started. What do you see as some of the characteristics of positive relationships? So when you're thinking about your relationships with your friends, your partners, your colleagues, your neighbors, what do you see as really those characteristics of really positive relationships? You're welcome to take yourself off of mute, or if you'd like to, you could drop your comments into the chat box. Somebody's saying, I'm reading the chat box now, monitoring, somebody's saying trust and honesty. So that is most certainly an important one, trust and honesty.
Meredith, if I could just interrupt you for 1 sec, we actually can see your notes on this.
Oh,
So,
you can.
Yep, I thought honestly that it was my view, but it looks like somebody else just put that in the chat too.
You know what? Okay, I'm glad you told me. Let me figure out how to swap this.
Okay.
I think what I need to do is I'm working on 2 screens, and I think
Okay.
I just need to swap my screens. So
Okay. Thank you.
let me see if I can get that going. Here we go. Okay, tell me, can you see those now?
Not yet.
What are you seeing on your end right now?
Now it's just just black screens, yeah, with like a line through the middle.
Okay, all right. Let me, I'm sorry, I'm glad you told me this. Let me see if I can get this swapped around. I think I just need to swap my screens here. Let me, if you don't mind, let me stop sharing for just a quick minute. If you want to keep putting your comments in the chat box there, that would be perfectly fine. Let me see if I can get this adjusted.
You're good now. It looks, at least we just see one screen, so.
Oh, you're seeing a screen right now?
We're just seeing you, yes.
You're just seeing me, okay, all right. Let me try to share again and see if I can fix this. And I'm so sorry, everybody, for the technical issues here. Okay, are we seeing the screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
Good shape.
That's not the one I wanted. Yikes. Okay, I'm sorry. Give me 1 second here. Let me see if we can. There we go. And everybody can see that on your end?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's start again. Let me move forward here. A couple of slides. Here we were at our community share. Okay. All right, so now we have characteristics of positive relationships. So, we have a few comments in the chat box here that we're seeing. Folks had said honesty, compassion, flexibility, trust, and communication, authenticity. So these are all really important things. And this is the point of this here is that, these are things that we look for in our relationships when we're developing them with colleagues, friends, neighbors, etc. But it's also what we are seeing our donors are looking for when they're talking to us, right? So we want to make sure that we are like building these, we are keeping in mind these really important building blocks of positive relationships, because ultimately that's what our donors are looking for. Okay, so what is donor retention exactly? And I'm sorry, if you all could give me just a second here, I have to get my notes up because Sharon, I'm so sorry. I gotta stop sharing again and try to fix this.
It's okay.
Sorry, everybody, bear with me here. I need to be able to get my notes because I've got all kinds of data that I want to share with you. So let me try to adjust this right now. Okay, try this one more time. Okay. Everybody seeing this on your end? Very good.
We are, but then yeah, I think if you just make it a full screen, it looks like we're seeing the sidebar. There we go.
Okay. Okay, so what is donor retention? I'm sorry about the technical issues, everybody. Donor retention is the number of donors that continue to give after their first contribution. And this is such an important topic because so many times what we tend to see in the nonprofit industry is a number of our donors don't return. And that number is actually staggeringly high. So the average donor retention rate is actually only about 42%. So that means that for every 100 donors that you have within your organization, about 60 or so of them are not returning. So that's a really, really high number that we want to try to prevent. And what's really even more interesting about that is the cost that it takes for us to retain or to keep our donors. So that's what we're talking about with donor retention. The other flip side of that is what we call donor attrition. So donor attrition really refers to that other side of that ratio. So the number of folks that are not returning every year. The donors that you retain are about 42%. The donors that you're losing every year is about the other 60%. So that being said, why is donor retention so important to your organization? It's important because of what we just said, the sheer cost that it costs us as an organization to keep our donors. So what we're looking at here is, for every donor that we keep, it's much cheaper for us as an organization to keep them in our database and to keep them engaged with our organization than when we go out and look for new ones. Take a second to just think about your organization and what it takes for you to find new donors, right? So the process of donor recruitment is really cumbersome, time consuming, and it takes a lot of personnel, time, and resources. So when you are looking for new donors and when you are trying to find new donors for your organization, what you're really doing there is you are looking for marketing, you're engaging folks outside of your development department, you're engaging folks in your marketing department, your communications department, sometimes your PR department if you have them. So because of that reason, we want to keep our donors engaged with us that are already in our organization. So let's talk about the cost. So the cost of acquiring new donors can be 50 to 100% more than the funds given by them to our organization. So what that means is that it can take several years to just break even on dollars raised versus dollars spent on outreach. So again, when we look at outreach, we're looking at things like our marketing efforts, our communication efforts, how much time we spend. There's a real cost to our personnel time on our teams as well. So I'm just kind of curious, what sort of methods do you all use for donor recruitment? So not donor retention, but when you're looking to bring new donors into your organization, what kind of methods do those include? And I want to have your comments in the chat box if we can, because what we'll do with that then is take a look at, what these things cost. I know for me, I can tell you one of the methods that I see very often is events, right? A lot of times organizations tell us, well, we find new donors through our events, our physical events. And anybody who has planned a fundraising event knows that it's very costly and time consuming. A couple people in the chat box have said things like social media. volunteers, resale of store customers, social media networking, peer-to-peer campaigns. So this is a really good one. iWave to identify new prospects. So all of these are one. This is a really great one. Somebody said speaking and presentations, and she had acknowledged that that requires travel. So you're starting to get an idea here of, why why the cost of acquiring new donors is sometimes double what it costs us to retain a donor. So an average rate for a sector, I shared this earlier, only 42.6% of donors are retained in your organization. So for every 100 donors who give, only around 40 are going to stay with you for over the next year. And the $1 million question here is, why is that, right? Why does that happen? So let's take a look at some of these reasons. Before we jump into this, I want to introduce to you what we call the cause selling cycle. And this is really the bread and butter of what we do at National University's Fundraising Academy. So the cause selling cycle. So many of you have seen a diagram like you're seeing here, a graphic and like you're seeing here in front of you. And really what you're seeing here is the fundraising cycle, right? So everything from bringing a donor in to going through the cultivation cycle, the solicitation, and the stewardship. We're going to focus very largely today on the stewardship section because that's the topic of our session today. But this may be a new phrase to some of you, but it's not a new concept, right? So cause selling is essentially fundraising, but we are very specific in using that term cause selling, and I'll tell you why. In the nonprofit industry, so often we emphasize, or we endeavor to emphasize to the rest of the world how very different we are from the for-profit industry. We like to use the word nonprofit and emphasize that to everyone we know, that we are in the nonprofit industry, that we are very different. And I think what I want to challenge you all to do today is to reframe the way you think of your role as a fundraiser. So for some of you, this word selling might make you feel a little uncomfortable, right? You might look at this word selling, and when I asked this in a conference recently, I was presenting live at a conference, and I asked the folks in the room, how do you feel about, thinking of your role as a salesman? And I got a lot of thumbs down. There was a lot of people telling me, I think of used car salesman when you say that word sales. I don't feel good about it. I want to challenge you today to reframe the way you view your role and think of your role as a fundraiser a little bit different. When we look at our counterparts in the for-profit industry, what we tend to see is the highly organized sales departments. They have teams of sales managers who oversee territories, who oversee salespeople, sales individuals in those territories. They have a very clearly defined understanding of who their customers are. They have a very clearly defined understanding of what their product is, and they know exactly who their market is. So when you take a look at a large company that sells products like Apple, they have a lot of data. They have an understanding of, again, what their product is and who their ideal customer is. So when we look at that model and we take it back to our nonprofit industries, what we want to do now is encourage our fundraisers to be more methodical and process oriented in their approach to fundraising. It's not haphazard. It's not fly by your seat. It's methodical and process oriented. And that's what the cause selling cycle really does here. It's broken up into 3 different phases. So what you're seeing in front of you here is the dark blue is phase 1, which has to do with the prospecting and pre-approach. What this means is how do we find donors and how do we qualify them? So there is a real difference between a lead and a prospect. And so that's the phase 1. Phase 2 has to do with the whole cultivation cycle, right? This is where we get face-to-face time with our donor. This is where we talk with them. We understand their motivations for giving. We understand what it is that they want to give to. That's what we see in the purple here is phase 2. And then phase 3 is our stewardship phase. And we'll focus largely on phase 3 today. But this is where we have an understanding of how our donors feel about the donation that they gave. what is their perception of how we use their dollars and the impact that came from their dollars after they made the gift. And you'll notice, as always, it's a circle because it's a cycle. So we want to keep as many donors in this circle, repeating this cycle as we can. So stewardship fosters loyalty, and that's stage 8. So that's what we're going to talk about today, or step 8, I guess I should say. So it's all about creating long-term relationships, and this is what's really important with our donors. It will take between 12 and 18 months to get all the way through this cycle that you're seeing in front of you here, right? These are not quick donations. We are not talking about these, like Facebook advertising campaigns where we have like a handful of donors who come in sort of out of nowhere, right? You can use this for that model as well. You can even use this cause selling cycle for things like grants and sponsorships as well. It can really be used for anything, but the focus of it here is long-term relationships. So we most often see it with things like major gifts. So it's about creating those long-term relationships. And when we go back to the chat box, if you scroll through the comments earlier, you're going to see all those positive attributes that build long-term relationships, which is trust and loyalty and communication. And these things don't happen overnight. Okay, so that being said, share 3 attributes of meaningful relationships. So we had a few. This is very similar to the first question, but I want you to take this a step further today. If on this particular question here, if you could think of 1 or 2 donors that you have cultivated and stewarded within your organization, is there anything specific about those relationships that you think led to the trust or the communication or whatever we had said in our first slide there, our first community share? Is there anything specific about them? And I'll start by giving you an example myself. So I had a particular donor that I was working with, and this is one of those stories where it's a failure story. I went in, I was new to the organization, I didn't know the mission really super well. And we had this incredible opportunity to meet with a gentleman who was a billionaire. He had the opportunity, he had the potential and the capacity to write a 7-figure check. We went in there and, gave our presentation. We had this beautiful slide deck and a few other resources in front of us. And with a donor like that, you get really one opportunity, right? You're not going to get many chances to meet with him. And he was, I think, very unimpressed with what we had put in front of him because we hadn't built the relationship yet. We were so focused on going in there knowing that we weren't going to get more than one opportunity to be in this man's office, that we went in and we had a proposal for him that we slid across the table on that first meeting. And he was really kind of put off, and he was offended because we didn't build that relationship yet. So what I'm looking for here is, if you think about your donors that you've worked with in your organizations, tell us, either take yourself off of mute if you have a story to share, or drop a comment in the chat box. What is it that built those relationships? Somebody said, this is a really good one. A particular donor asked me to come visit them at their home. I did, and I was able to share how I became involved with her organization. So that's a very personal meeting, right? Somebody welcoming you into their home is, a very personal step. It's intimate, it's personal, and because it's not transactional, right? So that's a really good example of like how you were able to build. And I'm willing to bet that this particular donor you already had a bit of a relationship with, because rarely do we welcome, complete strangers or invite complete strangers to our homes. Somebody else said, because we knew them very well from a long-term relationship, and we were able to really tailor the ask to something very meaningful to them. So that's a really, really good example, because basically Alexis said this one here, and I think what this refers to is that you already had an understanding of what motivated this particular individual to give. There was already that trust and that open communication there. I think it's important to show up for folks, not always an ask, but building knowledge of their life and bonding over your organization. That's a beautiful answer. I couldn't have said it better myself. And that one's really kind of gets to the point here, which is, this is a long-term strategy, right? Because it's a meaningful relationship. So when we tie it back to stewardship, really at the end of the day, what this means is we absolutely must be building genuine relationships with people if we want to retain them beyond that average 40%. That's a really important piece. Okay, so what do our donors say? And this is interesting because we have actually done the research and surveyed our donors, okay? So we've gone through and actually gotten firsthand responses from donors before. You know, what do our donors say about you know, why relationships are so important to them? And the answer is trust, right? So first and foremost, they're looking for that trust. Secondly, do they trust you as a fundraiser, and do they trust your organization? That's trust. Second one is impact. What they're looking for here is both quantitative and qualitative feedback of their gift, okay? Some donors, especially ones who are particularly savvy with their finances, view their donations as an investment. And what they're looking for is a return on that investment. So that is the idea of impact. You know, what is the impact that their donation has made? If somebody makes a donation to your organization and they don't get any feedback from you aside from a you know, very general tax deduction letter or a very general thank you note, they're not getting that impact question answered, right? So there has to be personalized follow-up with your donors that tell them both quantitatively with data, metrics, and facts, and also qualitatively with anecdotal stories and testimonials. Connection. Have you made the connection between, somebody in the chat box said, you know, we had a really clear understanding of what this person, what was important to them. That's what we mean by connection. Do you even know what their personal connection is to your mission or your organization? That's the first step, and that's something you find out during that need discovery phase. So you should have an answer to those questions before your donor even gives. You should have an understanding of what their connection is. I shared with you in the beginning of our presentation today that I've done a lot of work with military and veterans organizations. I also shared with you that I was a spouse, a military spouse, for 14 years. And so I was part of that military community. So when I do my philanthropic giving, very often I tend to find organizations that are military focused, and I have a bit of a soft spot in my heart for military transition or for children, military children that have to move every 2 to 3 years across the country. So you should have a very clear understanding of what the connection is. Maybe you're selling a cure for cancer. Some of your donors might have actually been through a cancer treatment before. They might have actually experienced cancer, been a patient, right? That's their connection. But sometimes we find people that don't have any affiliation whatsoever to cancer. That's your goal there, is to find out what the connection is. Perhaps it's a doctor, perhaps it's somebody who works in scientific research, perhaps it's somebody who, you know, had a friend or a neighbor who passed away from cancer years ago. There should be some kind of emotional connection that motivated them to give. Shared values is another one. Oftentimes we tend to see this one come up when we're talking with missions that are somehow politically motivated or maybe very closely to policy. So we have seen a real push in the last several years here in a really a strong push in a direction towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? There's been a societal change where what we have seen is a lot of organizations and companies, both for-profit and nonprofit, really getting together to acknowledge that there are wage gaps, there are access gaps, there are education gaps between different geographic and demographic populations. So that would be an example of shared values. There might be somebody who is a member of a marginalized community. Another one is influencers. So this is an example of, so sometimes organizations will use, and this is a really good way to recruit new donors, it's what we call centers of influence. And the idea there is what we're looking for is individuals who can serve as influencers for our organization, where they have access to large amounts of people and they can mobilize those networks. So sometimes that's celebrities. Sometimes we are lucky enough to get like a celebrity to join our board, or maybe a celebrity to be our spokesperson. Sometimes it's a local philanthropist in your local community. So I'll give you an example. I live here locally in Tampa, Florida, which is where I'm dialing in from today. But we have a well-known philanthropist here in Tampa who, oftentimes has his family name on buildings and on museums and that sort of thing. So every nonprofit in the local area considers themselves very lucky if they can get this particular individual involved with their organization because of his influence. And then the last one is tax benefits. And sometimes we tend to shy away from that because we like to think that all of our donors are very altruistic. But there are instances and cases in which donors tend to give because they receive some sort of tax benefit in return. Oftentimes we see that with companies and corporations, and it's a little more transactional, but keep that in mind when you're searching for sponsorships. I'm going to take a look at the chat box here, just because I saw a couple comments coming in. Is this list in order of importance? Yes, absolutely. So this is the list of, and I will give you a caveat here and say that sometimes you might have one or two donors who, maybe, and a good example is companies, corporations, and sponsorships. So sometimes in those cases, in very transactional fundraising, then the tax benefit or the influencer might be the top, leading reason that they give or they stay. But generally for individuals, this is in order of importance. These are all good questions, so keep them coming in the chat box, and if at any point I miss your question, feel free to interrupt. Okay, so now let's look at the flip side. Why do our donors leave? What we're seeing with the statistics here is that 60% or more are leaving us every year. They make one initial donation, or maybe they donate over a number of years, but then all of a sudden one day you're pulling your donor reports out of your database and you're realizing that there's a $5,000 gift that's missing that came every year for the past 5 years. What happened? So number one, they feel like they aren't needed. In other words, you hadn't done a well enough job at communicating or articulating to your donor what impact they made, right? So this is very similar to the phenomenon of voting. And I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day, actually, that made me think of this. And it was an much older woman, and she's in her 80s, and she was talking about politics, and she said to me, well, she said, I probably won't vote in the next presidential election. And she said to me, it's only one vote, right? It won't matter. And that, of course, is a whole political science topic we could talk about for hours. But I think the idea here is that it's the thought or the perception that your $1 or your one vote doesn't matter, right? So we need to do a much better job at articulating and communicating to our donors why they're needed. Without you, we absolutely cannot meet these goals, or without you, we cannot find a cure for cancer, or without you, we cannot save the animals in our shelter, whatever your mission might be. They don't feel appreciated. I would venture to say that this is one of the top reasons, if not the top reason, that donors don't return. If we are not doing a well enough job at thanking our donors and making sure that they feel heard and seen and appreciated, they will take their dollars elsewhere. And a really good way to do this is when I come into a new development, like department or a new shop, oftentimes what I do is I will instruct my employees or my clients, and I'll say, make a donation of $5. Just pick one or two or four or five. Pick a handful of organizations, nonprofits, and make a $5 donation and see what happens. Very often you will find that you receive no response at all. Sometimes you get an automated email response that says thank you for your donation, but beyond that, there's no response at all. There are a few instances in which somebody will receive a personal phone call or a handwritten note, or sometimes like a welcome packet in the mail. So these are all ways to make sure that your donors are feeling appreciated and valued. They're unsure of the funding impact. What do we mean by that? This kind of goes back to hand in hand to the first bullet point in which they think they aren't needed. So on the last slide, we talked about some donors who tend to be very motivated by the idea of a return on their investment. So in other words, they view their donation as an investment, a social investment. If they're looking to cure cancer, they want to know what was the impact of their funding. Did you publish like maybe a medical article or journal? Did the organization contribute to something in medical research? Did you provide scholarships for kids? They're looking for a very clear understanding of what the impact of their funding was. And this is the hardest one for most nonprofits to manage. And I'll tell you that because I've worked with a number of organizations as a consultant on all different mission areas. And I will tell you, this is the hardest thing for them to answer. Oftentimes, as nonprofits, we have an understanding of what the problem is, and we think we know what the solution is, but we never really communicate that to our donors. So make sure you are giving a very clear understanding to your donors of what their impact was. And if there's 2 words you take away from today, it should be qualitative and quantitative. You must be able to share with them data, facts, metrics. That's the quantitative data. You should also be able to share with them those testimonials and those anecdotal stories. That's your qualitative data. The last 2, they feel that others are more deserving. What we mean there is that they feel that other nonprofits are more deserving, right? So this is a hard pill. This is a tough pill to swallow. And I don't mean to be insensitive when I say it, but I say it to nonprofit clients when I work as a consultant all the time. And it's a hard message for a lot of them to hear. But oftentimes your mission is a dime a dozen. You are not the only nonprofit that is tackling military, like veteran transition services. You are not the only nonprofit that is targeting homelessness. You are not the only nonprofit that's targeting STEM programs for children or cures for cancer or whatever it may be. So you have to be absolutely at the top of your game in articulating what sets you apart, what is your value proposition, what makes you unique, and what makes you more efficient and effective than all the others. If you're not doing that well, your donors are leaving you for one of your quote competitors, right? They no longer feel that your organization is most deserving of their dollars. And then the last one, they can no longer afford it. This one here is what I like to call an objection that you absolutely can overcome. So let me give you a quick brief example here. When a donor, if you have the opportunity to speak with a donor and you're asking for a gift, or maybe you already have a gift from a current donor who is on like a monthly reoccurring basis, and then they stop their gift, and you have a conversation with them and you ask them why. Sometimes you'll get feedback that says something along the lines of, well, I've got 2 children in an Ivy League school right now, and it's financially, it's just not a good time. I had one donor one time who said, I really love the work you guys are doing, but my husband just started a business and we're really short on cash. And those are understandable because those are life events and life situations that happen, right? You could, at that point, as a fundraiser, pack up your things and go home and just say to yourself, well, it is what it is. I have no control over it. They don't have the funding to continue their donation. Or you can view their objection as an opportunity to serve as a trusted advisor to your donor. They have a philanthropic need that they are trying to meet, and they feel like they can't meet that need anymore because of other factors or circumstances. So again, if you're a really good fundraiser, you should view yourself and help your donors to view you as a trusted financial advisor to help them still meet that philanthropic need. So you could suggest something along the lines of, totally understand that you've got 2 children in an Ivy League school right now. Let me help you think of other ways that you can still contribute. Have you considered putting us in your will at all? Or have you considered doing estate planning? I can refer you to a really good CPA or financial advisor who might be able to talk to you about other ways that you can still give to the XYZ Foundation. So that would be a way for you to overcome that objection. So in some cases, you will lose people because they simply don't have the funding, but you'd be surprised at how many people are willing to still contribute to you and to still make you a philanthropic priority if you help them. Another example would be saying to somebody, have you considered leaving a portion of your life insurance policy as leaving, our foundation as a beneficiary of your life insurance policy. So those are some ways that you can work with your donors to keep them retained. I'm going to pause there for just a quick minute if there's any questions. Does anybody have, anything that they want to touch base on these last couple of slides? You can feel free to put them into the chat box, or if not, I'll just keep going. Okay, very good. No news is good news, I think. Okay, so now developing meaningful relationships. What do we mean by that? So we have to be intentional about it. That means we have to be deliberate, right? We have to get in front of our donors. If you're one of these organizations that only has maybe 1 or 2 physical events a year, so let's say I worked with one recently, in a nonprofit that had 2 events a year. They had a large black tie gala that came in the early spring, and then they had a golf tournament that came in the early fall. That's it. There was no other opportunities for their donors to sit side by side with their beneficiaries, with their community. They really didn't have any opportunities to get together, right? So we have to be intentional and deliberate about providing opportunities to see our donors. So that means sometimes we have events, sometimes we have lecture series. They don't have to be in person, it could be online. You'd be surprised at how many people really value intellectual dialogue. And you can do that with almost any mission area. So I had an organization that I worked with one time that did what they called fireside chats. And it was a live, face-to-face event where there was a handful of people that would come and listen to an intellectual lecture or maybe topic of discussion from somebody prominent. But they also did a live stream of it, and it was available, live on a virtual basis for folks who weren't in their local geographic area. They weren't asking for money. They weren't asking donors to give. It was not a solicitation event. It was simply an opportunity for them to be intentional about, building relationships with people. And then they would always get on the phones afterwards and call folks who came to the event and say, hey, Joe, I saw that you were at the fireside chat. It was really great seeing you again. Just kind of curious if you had any feedback. What did you think about the topic? And you're not asking for money. You're just being very intentional about building a relationship. The next one, create a list of essential information. This is for you internally in your development shop. So when we say create a list of essential information, what we mean is be very organized with your research and your files on your donors. You should have an individual cultivation plan for every single donor who is giving a major gift or has been qualified for a major gift at your organization. A major gift is defined differently at every organization. So for one, it might be $2,500. For another, it might be $25,000. But the point is, you should have a donor cultivation plan that memorializes your contact log. It should memorialize personal confidential information about your donor, like who are they, where do they live, who is their spouse, how many children do they have, what's their alma mater, what other organizations are they giving to. So you should be very organized in your approach. And I'm going to tie this back to what I said in the beginning of the presentation, which is when we look at for-profit entities, when we look at the for-profit industry, companies that are selling products and services, they have very, very detailed understanding of who their customers are and what their product is. As a nonprofit and as a fundraiser, we should be just as organized and process-oriented as the sales team over at Apple, right? We should have files on all of our customers, on all of our donors that outline really important information. The next one, discover something new in each interaction. So every time you're meeting with a donor, it's an opportunity for you to do what we call need discovery. That's my favorite step in the cause selling cycle, is what's called need discovery. This typically happens before you make an ask. So every time you're meeting with a prospect or with a donor, it's an opportunity for you to find out something else about them. What you need to do then is you need to take that information and use it, right? So it's a cycle. So take that information and go right back up to the first bullet to be intentional. So if you find out that this particular person had a son or a daughter who most recently in the month of June just graduated from, I don't know, Yale University, that would be an opportunity for you to reach out then later. Like, let's say you came across a really interesting article about a graduate from Yale University, or maybe you came across a really interesting article about a new degree program at the university, or maybe you met with somebody on your board who you found out also went to Yale University. That's when you take that new information and you're very intentional with it. So send a quick email and say like, hey Joe, I thought you might want to see this article I just recently came across about Yale University. I remember you mentioned that your son just graduated. I thought you would find this interesting. Or maybe you could provide an email and say, hey, I want to congratulate you again on your son's graduation from Yale University. I just recently found out that the treasurer on our board is also an alumni of Yale. I thought it might be nice for the two of you to connect. Those are kind of arbitrary examples, but the point is every time you meet with a donor is an opportunity to find out something new and then to use that information to make a very intentional, deliberate connection. And then the last one, record all of your actions in your CRM. And I'm like looking at some of you here who are like maybe hiding their face, because when I work with organizations, one of the first pieces of feedback I often receive is that when I come in as a consultant, one of the first pieces of information I often receive is them saying to me, our data is in shambles, okay? Like, we just want to give you a disclaimer up front that our database is not really well organized. And that happens very often. And we could do a whole session about data and how to organize it. But the point is, you can start now with recording all of your actions in your CRM. So you have to be recording your contact logs. You should be recording little bits of information that you put into a notes section. You should be recording the confidential information that you find out. You should be making connections with spouses and colleagues. So if you have Joe Smith as a potential donor or as one of your donors, and let's say he works at Microsoft, if you have another colleague or somebody else in your database who also works at Microsoft, you want to link those two records together. It will help you to start to develop a map that groups people together by common interests. And so then you might be able to use that information later to go back and say, you know, we recently found out that Microsoft has an employee giving program or a matching gift program. We know that we have 25 donors who work at Microsoft. They may not all know each other, but we know that they all work for the same organization. That's an opportunity then for you to get that group together or to develop a highly personalized approach for them. So that's what we mean by record things in your CRM. One more note that I'm going to say about CRMs. When you have too many cooks in the kitchen, it tends to get very messy. So it's best if you create a standard operating procedure whereby you have one or two designated individuals who are responsible for managing your CRM. You want to make sure that all of your donors are entered in the same sort of fashion or in the same way. So that's another note here about your CRM, is just on a side note, be very organized and intentional with how you enter your data into your CRM, because data is really only as good as, you know, if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. So we want to make sure that we're really organized with our data. Okay, with that, I'm going to review my chat box for just a quick second. I've got a couple questions here. Yes, there are some questions here about the cause selling cycle, and I did see the one about moves management. I'm going to answer that one at the end. I see there's an answer in here already, but it's very, very similar to moves management, which really focuses on the process of moving your donors or your prospects from one stage to the next. Cause selling is very, very similar, right? So it's a large focus on moving folks through. There are 8 defined, distinct steps to the process. We want to move folks through that circle constantly. Okay, let me see here. Now, developing meaningful relationships. What does it mean to be philanthropic centered? Basically, what we mean there is to have a focus on your organization and your mission, and to ask your donor these questions you see in front of you. And it is perfectly acceptable for you to ask these questions to a donor. It is perfectly acceptable to pick up the phone and say, I want to thank you first and foremost for your most recent gift of $250. That was really generous of you. I just wanted to take a minute to call you and kind of get an understanding of, why our organization. Like, tell me a little bit about your background. Why our cause? And then you wait for a response, and it's a dialogue. You can also ask somebody and say, I really appreciate your most recent donation of $250. That was really generous of you. I just wanted to call and thank you, and I wanted to ask you, what prompted your first gift with us? How did you hear about us? And they'll let you know generally. If you have a donor who's been with you for 10 years and gives $5,000 on the 1st of December every year, chances are you probably already know that donor. But if you don't, or maybe you're new to the organization and you don't know the history there, you should be picking up the phone and calling and saying, I'm just curious, why do you keep giving? What is it about our mission or our organization or our people that keeps you engaged? And you will find that most donors are very willing to answer these questions. I mean, they are rarely, if any, have I had a donor who was annoyed with me for calling to find out more. So these are all questions that are perfectly acceptable to ask. What, how, and when would you like to hear from us? This is a good one, because I will tell you that I have come across a situation before where I get nasty grams in my email occasionally from donors who say, I received too many emails from you guys. Stop mass emailing me, or stop asking for money, or stop sending me your newsletter. This is a good way to prevent that. So just asking your donor, what are your preferences on how you'd like to hear from us? These are good ways to be philanthropic centered in your approach and in your questions and in your dialogue with your donors. So you want to also think of, these are some tips for engagement. So what are some opportunities for donors to be engaged? So you want to think of ways that they can see your work in action. Can you do site visits? Do you have like a college campus that you can bring them to? Do you have, maybe you're a hospital and you can plan like a tour of the hospital one day. Maybe you work at a university or at an education institution, and there's an opportunity for you to bring a donor in to sit through a lecture, to observe a class. I will tell you that one's very, very popular. If you have, if you work in any kind of education-centered mission, donors love to come and be immersed in the actual experience. So if you can have an opportunity to have them sort of sit there and observe a class, that's a really great way for them to see you in action. Are there opportunities for your donors to interact with your staff and your volunteers? I'll give you an example here. I had an organization that was stuffing backpacks for like a back to school event. And they were going to provide, 500 backpacks and hand them out at a back to school event for like the local children in the school district. And so they had a donor that, provided the backpacks and provided all the highlighters and crayons and all the stuff that went in the backpacks. They also provided that donor, that sponsor, with an opportunity to have 30 volunteers from their company come to stuff the backpacks. So not only were they writing a check to provide the supplies, but take it a step further and see if there's an opportunity that you can have them come and volunteer and hand out the backpacks. The value there is that they're seeing your beneficiaries, right? They're not just seeing you internally within your organization, they're getting an opportunity to see, who you're helping in the community. So perhaps you work with a hospital foundation. Is there an opportunity for you to get your donors in front of patients? And what does that look like? Another one is hearing from your beneficiaries. Maybe you can't get your donors in front of a patient, but maybe what you can do is you can get testimonials and stories from patients who were healed or who had life-saving treatments, and then you can share those testimonials and stories back to your donors. Learn the impact of your gifts. You want to give your donors an opportunity to understand, again, both the qualitative and quantitative impact of their gift. Most of all, you want them to feel valued, right? So these are some ways that you can really have strong engagement with your donors. So the top 3 donor retention tips. Okay, so you want to think like a donor, right? So that's why I suggested early on, it's a great exercise for you as a fundraiser to go and make a donation. Pick any organization of your choice. Maybe your what's near and dear to your heart is animals. Maybe it's, you know, a cancer cause or something else, a social you know, issue in our community or in our world today. Find an organization and make a donation to it. It could be small, or you could make $100 donation, right? So find an organization and make a donation to it and start to think of yourself as a donor. You will be surprised how many times I talk to professional fundraisers who tell me that they don't actually give. And that's a problem, right? Because you can't possibly think like a donor if you've never been a donor. So what we tend to see in the nonprofit industry, just in general, is that the baby boomers and the older generations are the ones who are most philanthropic. What we're seeing now is a trend towards less philanthropic inclination and less philanthropic activity with our younger generation. So in the current workforce today, when we're working with folks who are in their 30s or 40s or early 50s, they're not as philanthropic as the older generations. And so you would be surprised how many times I work with professional development teams and nobody on the team is really a donor themselves. So that's something I would encourage you to do, is find an organization and make a donation of whatever is meaningful for you and your family, and watch and see what happens there. And watch and be very cognizant of how it makes you feel, right? So if you don't hear back from the organization, it's going to make you feel a certain way. So, and that's how your donors are feeling on their end. Another tip here, treat everybody that you have as a very important person, a VIP. Sometimes in fundraising, we are very tempted to categorize our donors according to their giving levels. So what we tend to see then is that we identify people as we tag them or flag them in our database as a major gift donor or a major gift prospect. And then what happens is those people tend to receive more attention and more of our time and more of our resources than the folks who are giving us $100 on like a Facebook fundraiser or in a peer-to-peer campaign. And there's a lot of, value to that, I think, from an efficiency standpoint, because we want to make sure within our development teams that we are staying really focused on what is going to provide us the most ROI from a revenue standpoint. However, it's really important that we also recognize when we talk about donor retention as a topic or as a subject, again, it costs us twice as much to bring in a new donor as it does to retain a donor who's already with us. So we want to make sure we're treating everybody like a very important person, because it'll cost us twice as much to replace them when they leave. The other thing that I would just want to throw out here is a statistic. So I shared with you that donor retention rate is about 42% as an industry average, but there's a caveat to that. The average donor retention rate for reoccurring donors is 89%. So what that means is when you can get your donors to opt in to automatic reoccurring donations on like a monthly basis or maybe a quarterly basis, those donors are being retained at almost 90% year over year over year. The other statistic that's really relevant here is that their lifetime giving is almost 300% higher than a one-time donor. So even if you get a donor who makes an initial like $2,500 donation, a lot of us would look at that and say, this is a significant donation. Somebody wrote a check for $2,500 and sent it in as a first-time donation. I think most of us would be happy with that as a fundraiser. But because of that, we oftentimes ignore or don't think of our monthly donors who are writing us a check for $100 a month. We look at that and say, the comparison between $100 and $2,500 is very different. So we give more attention to the $2,500 donor. But when we look at the lifetime average or the lifetime value of our reoccurring donors, it's almost 300% higher. So that donor who's giving you $100 every month on their credit card is going to far exceed the one-time $2,500 donation you got from this particular individual. So, moral of the story here is to treat everybody like a VIP and to remember that, you know, it's that personal interaction that's moving the relationship along. It's that personal interaction that's really valuable. The last one, say thank you like you mean it. So we all have a process in our you know, development departments where somebody makes a donation and then they receive a thank you letter, right? Typically it's auto-generated. It's a standard template. It's a thank you for your donation of X amount of dollars to our foundation. Your donation is tax deductible. Here's our tax, like our, you know, EIN number, et cetera, et cetera. So oftentimes we send out our tax deduction letters because that's a process that we have to do as a nonprofit, right? And you should do it. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't, but that's not enough, right? So we can't consider that as the personal thank you. We have to go a step further. You should be assigning lists of donors to your board members and to your volunteers. They are looking for things to do. They are looking for ways to be involved. So give them a list of donors and say, you know, first name, last name, phone number, and most recent gift. And, you know, pull a short little report and give each of your board members a list of like 20 donors and say, I need you to call these 20 people, and then ask them to record their notes. And then you're going to go back and you're going to enter those notes into your CRM, because we talked about that a couple slides ago. Another way to do it is to do handwritten notes. So if you have either a chief development officer, maybe it's your CEO, maybe it's a board member, or maybe it's a couple of board members, you can set aside time to put a stack of notes, a stack of like printed out thank you notes on, you know, in front of each of these people, and ask them to personalize them. So give them a, you know, pretty blue gel pen and ask them to write a personalized note at the bottom of the letter. Another thing you can do, and I'll give you this example. I worked with an organization one time that had this really incredible event up in Newport, Rhode Island. They would do what they called a donor appreciation dinner. And it was this beautiful, you know, cocktail attire event, and they rented out the Rose Cliff Mansion, which is right on a cliff in Newport, Rhode Island, beautiful place. It was not a fundraiser. They weren't asking donors to give. They weren't asking donors to purchase tickets. The event was covered by sponsors, but it's a donor appreciation event. And basically what they did is they were identifying all of their major donors, their significant donors, and saying, we want to invite you to an evening of celebrating you. And so they had this beautiful cocktail style event, and you know, it was an open bar and everybody was wining and dining, and it was beautiful, but their donors felt really, really appreciated. So what happened then was really interesting. They had the qualification, the criteria to get invited to that event was donors who gave $5,000 or more. And this event turned into such a coveted event that what happened was donors were calling and saying, why wasn't I invited to the donor appreciation event at the Rose Cliff Mansion? I really wanted to go to it. And the organization was saying, that's something special we do as a thank you for our major donors who give, you know, $5,000 or more on an annual basis. So then what they started to see was that people were upgrading their gifts, right? Because they wanted to be invited to this exclusive event. So in a summary, you know, you want to say thank you in a really meaningful way. Your donors want to feel appreciated. So find out what that way is for you and for your organization, what makes the most sense. It doesn't need to be a black tie event at the Rose Cliff Mansion. It could be something smaller, but you want to find a way to thank people above and beyond your computer generated note. Okay, now let's stop here and have some interaction from the group. How does your organization engage donors? So what are you guys doing within your organizations that, you know, you're finding is a good way to get people engaged and to get them immersed in your mission? I'm seeing a couple comments, by the way, as you all are thinking on this. I'm seeing a couple questions here, and we're going to have a question section at the end, so I'll come back to these. Somebody said monthly tours. That's a really great one. So again, like site visits and tours of your facilities or of your property or whatever it is you're doing within your organization. That's a really good way to invite folks. I worked with an organization one time who created, again, they were going off of this incredible data that we tend to see with reoccurring donors. And they were like, they're on to something with that, right? 89% retention rate, 300% higher lifetime giving. And so what they did was they created what they called a Sustainer Society. And the Sustainer Society was basically just the recognition they gave to people who elected to do reoccurring gifts. And one of the benefits of becoming a member of the Sustainer Society is that you were invited to exclusive monthly tours of the facilities. And so that's a really great example of something that you can do to engage folks. Videos, that's another really good one. So somebody said we create videos. That's a really great way to connect with people that's different and kind of unique, and it doesn't require them to like sit there and read a newsletter or sit there and read a website, right? So if you can have your CEO and maybe one of your board members and one of your beneficiaries interview them in a video, invest in a production company or a graphic designer or somebody who can come in and help you put some music behind it and transitions in front of it and that kind of thing. You could end up with a really beautiful 2-minute video clip that's emotional, right? We want to evoke an emotional response. So maybe you're interviewing a patient who's telling their story of how the hospital foundation supported them or how the hospital provided a life-saving treatment. You can create this beautiful little video clip and you can send it out to your donors, and it's very personal. It allows them to put a face to their dollars, right? So their dollars, their donation has a direct link to this individual or this beneficiary. CEO conversations is another good one. I like to refer to my CEO at any organization I'm working with as a tool in the toolkit, right? So you want to move the relationship along as far as you can as a fundraiser. And when you get to a point where you're stalled or plateaued or stuck and you can't get your donor above that hump, right? You can't quite get them ready to make a donation, bring in your CEO. That's a tool in your toolkit that you can use. It makes them feel valued and appreciated to have access to like the top person in the organization. Somebody said for new donors, we send out a welcome email with links to client videos. So again, seeing that using videos there is a really good way to engage people, and it's something, quite frankly, that's different than just reading. Somebody said for our members who give regularly at higher dues levels or at higher donation levels, we have special appreciation events, which is very similar to that anecdotal story I just shared with you recently. So these are all really, really great ways to engage your donors, to engage folks with your organization. Okay, so let's talk about follow-up now, right? So these are the 4 P's of follow-up. Being prompt. You want to respond to your donors quickly. Okay, if somebody makes a donation to your organization, you cannot let that fall on a stack of, papers that are in your to-do list or in your to-do file. They have to be prioritized, right? So they need a prompt response. I always say that I like to see organizations give an immediate response to a donation within 48 hours. It doesn't need to be this big grand, handwritten note, but make sure that they are receiving either a personal email or an auto-generated email or a phone call or something within 48 hours. It doesn't need to be anything super grand, but they should receive a response promptly. The next one is personalized. So again, just the auto response that says, thank you for your gift, we received your donation of $25, that's not enough. It has to be personalized, right? So they need to have something above and beyond that. Some of you might be looking for examples of things you can do to make it personalized, and I'll go back to this same example that I gave you earlier, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it works. consider making a donation to another organization, to another mission, and wait and see what happens. You will get, if it's a good organization that's very good at stewardship, you will get all kinds of grand ideas. I had a donor one time who I was working with an organization that was in like a medical cure kind of area. They were fundraising for like finding a cure to a certain disease. And there was a woman that I met with, and she was a mother of a child who had this debilitating disease. And she came in, and we were going to ask her for a significant donation. And it was really interesting to me because she brought with her a file. And we didn't even ask for it. She came to the meeting with a file, and it was stuffed full of all kinds of stuff that she got from another like hospital that she was donating to. And she came and sat this file in front of her, and she's like, I just really wanted to share this with you. And she said, I made a $50,000 donation to the hospital in the community that I live in. And she said, look at all this wonderful stuff they send me. And she had like, there was pictures of patients, and there was handwritten notes from doctors, and there was medical like journals, and there was all kinds of stuff in here. And it was clearly very, very important to her. She had it inside of like organized with tabs inside of a binder, and she brought this whole file with her to share with us what another organization is doing or giving her. And it showed a very personalized approach, right? So think of ways that you can be personalized with your donors, and you'll be surprised how much it means to them and what they do with that. Some of them like tuck this stuff away, and really they save it. They save all of it. Every note you write them, every picture you send them, they save it. Make it passionate, right? So what I mean here is that one of your jobs as a fundraiser is to evoke an emotional response. You should constantly be looking for ways to evoke an emotional response. And what do we mean by that? So emotion could be anything from fear. So like I work with a lot of military organizations, and sometimes what they do is they put, pictures of Marines on the front lines, or snipers, or, things of that, like things from the front lines of, battleships and whatnot. That evokes an emotional response, and sometimes it's fear, right? When we think of what could happen if our Marines weren't out there defending our national security, it makes us fearful. It could be pride. Sometimes we have the American flags, showing, and we have, our service members lined up, and it gives us a sense of pride. It could be happiness. I mean, if you're showing pictures and you're sharing stories of families that are reunited, or the animal shelter with all of the doors open because all of the dogs got adopted. These are emotional responses that you're trying to evoke in your donors. A good example of this is, for those of you that watch TV, you might see, I don't know if they still play these, but they used to. Do you remember the commercials that used to have for abused animals? And they were asking you to donate, like, call the number and donate. And it was like the really sad Sarah McLachlan song was playing in the background. And there was all these pictures of these like poor puppies and abused animals. It evokes an emotional response in us. And that's what motivates us to give. So when you are trying to think of ways to be passionate with your donors, think of ways that you can evoke an emotional response in them. It doesn't have to be sad. It can be happy, but find ways that you can make them feel that emotional connection. And of course, the last one is to be positive, right? So you want to constantly be happy and positive, and eager to, when you speak with them. Energetic is a good way to put it. So these are the 4 P's of follow-up with your donors. So that being said, I'm going to pause here. We've got about 15 minutes left, and I know there's a few questions in the chat box that I'm going to scroll back through, but I'd love to hear your additional questions. So anything that maybe we didn't touch on today, but what do you think? Somebody said, what suggestions do you have for our donors who are still writing checks and making offline donations? So I'm not sure what you mean by offline donations, but I think if I'm reading this right, I think what you mean is people that are like doing snail mail, right? Like they're writing checks and sending in their mail, and they're not necessarily like taking advantage of your your electronic methods of giving. Yes, she says yes. Okay, good. I'm glad I understood that. So again, what we tend to see there is a lot of times it's our older generation, right? So I'm going to refer you back to that slide a few minutes ago where we said, ask your donors what method of communication means the most to them. Some of them will tell you, don't email me, I never check my email. If that's the case, then don't waste your time sending them video clips in their email as a way of stewardship. They're not going to see them. So you want to find out, and then they're going to feel like they weren't stewarded and weren't appreciated because, you know, you may have been sending out all of these video clips and these testimonials in email, but they're not seeing them because they don't use email. So the first thing I would suggest is to go ahead and ask your donors, what's the best way for me to communicate with you? I'd like to share stories with you, and I'd like to share testimonials with you, and I'd like to share some of our data with you over the years or over the coming months. What's the best way to get in touch with you? Don't be shy about asking them that question. So that would be my first suggestion. For people who say to you, I don't use email, I don't want to look at a computer, like I'm really old school, then the best thing for you to do is to make sure that you have tools in your toolkit that allow you to still steward them in the snail mail. So sometimes it's printing off this really beautiful, glossy, like brochure document. Like the woman who came, the donor I told you about that brought me like the file that she got from the hospital. I mean, most of that stuff was sent to her in the mail. It wasn't even like emails she received. It was like tangible, physical pieces of paper. So think about ways that you can, you know, for folks that don't do that. I'm scrolling back through our questions here. Here's a question. Why is it that the younger generation is not as philanthropic? Is it a cost of living or something else? That's a loaded question, and I think there's probably a lot of data out there, and I don't necessarily have all of it in front of me right now, but I think you're right. I think you're onto something when you say, you know, inflation and the cost of living has become exponentially higher in the past few decades than what it was, you know, when we saw those baby boomers in their, you know, in their younger years. So absolutely, I think part of it is economical. I think the other part of it there is that there's just been a shift in the industry, right? I think that a lot of times there's just been a culture change, and for whatever reason, our younger donors or our younger generation just isn't as philanthropic. There is not that, I think what happened is that a lot of our society started looking to government programs and societal programs to fill inadequacies within our communities, right? So we look to the government to stand up programs that address homelessness or address healthcare or whatever. Decades ago, it was more so individuals and companies and corporations and really nonprofit organizations that were addressing those inadequacies. So I think there's some of it like that. That has something to do with it. Again, we could probably have an entire 2-hour session exploring the data and like the causality of why that is. But I think that's part of it. Her question, follow-up, how can we combat this? Again, that's a loaded question. You should connect with me offline because I have all kinds of data I could share with you on that one. Let me see here. Do you have a resource on data entry standardizations for CRMs? That's a really great question. So what I would suggest there is that you work to create a standard operating procedure within your organization, and it's largely dependent on what CRM you have, what functionality it has, and the size of your staff, right? But what I will emphasize again is that this is a really important topic that is so valuable and critical for your organization. Here's what I'll say about data. I said this before, but you know, data is garbage. If it's garbage in, it's garbage out, right? So your CRM is only as good as the person entering the data. So that's first and foremost something you want to pay attention to. You have to be really organized in how you're entering your data. I'll give you an example. If, you know, okay, my name is Meredith Tarian, right? But my middle initial is K. If somebody enters my first gift as Meredith Tarian as the donor, I'll have a donor profile created for Meredith Tarian, and it might say $150 gift or whatever it is. If I send in another check or I make another gift online and the credit card receipt has my middle initial in it as K, somebody might type that in and not realize that there's already a donor profile for Mereditarian, and they might create a new one. So now I have 2 donor profiles. One of them is going to show the original gift I made for 150, and then maybe I made another gift for 5,000. Now there's another profile that says Meredith K. Tarian, and if somebody says, go in and find out how much money Meredith Tarian donated, they type the original donor record in, they're only going to see $150. They're not going to see the 5,000. So that's sort of a silly example, but the reason I bring that up is because I've seen it happen time and time and time again. The best way to categorize your donors in your CRM is not by their name. It's by their donor profile number. Every donor profile will assign a number to each donor. You are far better off to track donations by the donor profile number than you are by the name. If somebody misspells the name or the last name, it will create a whole new profile. So that's what I'll say about your CRM. So those standard operating procedures are really, really important. Let's see here. I'm going to keep scrolling. Now, there was a couple of questions about moves management and cause selling. So let me address that one briefly. So moves management is a highly acceptable, applauded system in fundraising that most of us are familiar with. Moves management refers to the process of moving donors or prospects through the cycle, right? And it's very, very effective at doing that. And the reason for that is because in fundraising, we evaluate effort, but we measure results. So moves management is the process of evaluating that effort, right? If the activity is being done, the results will follow. So instead of moves management doesn't necessarily track the quotas or the metrics at the end of every quarter, what it's doing is it's tracking the activity of your major gift officers. So how many face-to-face visits did you have this month? How many phone calls did you make this month? How many emails did you send? Because it recognizes that if all of that activity is being done, it will move your donors through the cycle. Cause selling is very, very similar. It has a cycle, it has steps in the cycle, and those steps are associated with activities, right? So, the approach or the pre-approach, need discovery is the process of talking to your donor and understanding their motivations, etc. What's different about cause selling is that it's focused on the relational aspect of that relationship. So cause selling is all about understanding the motivations understanding the donor's motivations to give. So it places a large emphasis on being methodical and process oriented. There are 8 steps. You cannot skip the steps. So it's very methodical and process oriented, but it's very much focused on the relational aspect. If you get engaged with us at National University's Fundraising Academy, you'll see that our curriculum goes into much, much more than just those 8 steps. We have a lot of content and curriculum that deals with focuses on things like emotional styles of talking, right? So we analyze what is the emotional style of your donor and what is your emotional style. Is your donor very analytical? If you recognize that, then you need to change your approach to meet the emotional style of your donor. Is your donor very much motivated by that emotional response? If that's the case, then you want to change your presentation and change your approach to meet their emotional style. So that's what I'll say about moves management and cause selling, is that yes, they're very similar. They both are a cycle of moving the donor through the process. But cause selling is very much focused on that emotion or that relational aspect and building those lasting relationships. Let me see if I have any other questions. I think that was most of the ones in our chat box here. Is there any other questions? And by the way, you're welcome to take yourself off of mute anytime if you'd like to. Let me go through a quick summary here if I can with you all. So prioritize long-term meaningful donor relationships, right? So that's really important. Again, cause selling is all about that relational aspect. You can reduce attrition. Again, attrition is the number of donors that you're losing. You can reduce attrition by understanding your donors and their motivations to give. You want to make your thank you very highly personalized and say thank you like you mean it. think like a donor. The best way to do that is to become a donor. So really take that into consideration. Develop and implement a stewardship plan. So remember, we said earlier that we want you to write down all the essential information about your donor and memorialize it in your CRM. That's your donor stewardship plan. If you'd like to learn more about either myself or Fundraising Academy, you can find us here. Either this QR code here will bring you directly to me. You can also find all kinds of resources through National University's Fundraising Academy. And we have all kinds of educational content that's coming up. The QR code that you're seeing up there in the corner is one of our upcoming webinars on July 10th. That's all about planned giving. So you might want to join us then to talk about planned giving. And we have an online learning portal that's totally free for you. All of the resources on our online learning portal. We have micro learning videos. We have programs and webinars, all kinds of stuff. You can take a look at that as well. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it back over to Sharon.
Great. Thank you so much, Meredith. As always.
Sharon, it sounds like you might be on mute.
Am I? I don't think so. Can you hear me now? No.
It doesn't look like you're on mute, but we can't. Can everyone else hear her? Or maybe it's just my computer.
We can hear you, Sharon.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. I am in a place where I'm without great connection, so I wouldn't be surprised. But thank you so much, Meredith. As always, you're just such an expert in all things fundraising and so articulate in just putting these concepts together and looking at things in a new way. So we really appreciate your time and attention. And I would also encourage everybody to do connect with Meredith if you would like through the Fundraising Academy. And if you're not already subscribed to the Fundraising Academy's e-lists, to definitely do that so that you hear about all of the programming. Their programming, much of it is no cost, and including the webinar that she mentioned that's going to be happening at the end of July 10th. Sorry, I got distracted with Alexis's note. If we can find the if I can get the link for it, sure, I'll put the link to the workshop in the follow-up email that we'll send. So we will send that follow-up shortly. We did also, Christina from Dr. Bronner's also put a link in the chat if you could answer or fill out the evaluation. It's like 2 or 3 really quick questions. It's very helpful. We'll also include that link in the follow-up note. So I think with that, I'll close out. We have 1 minute to spare, but I hope everybody has a great rest of your day. And thank you so much again, Meredith. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.